The night my daughter-in-law threatened to cut me out of the family, she thought the $870,000 house was already hers. She was wrong, and before Monday's closing, I made sure she would never own it. Chapter 1. The Ultimatum over Sunday Roast. Lenora wiped her hands on a floral apron, listening to the sharp clicking of heels across her hardwood kitchen floor. Sienna dropped her designer handbag onto the island counter with a heavy thud, her expression tight. Callum followed behind his wife, looking tired and reluctant as he avoided his mother's steady gaze. The smell of rosemary roasted chicken filled the sunlit kitchen in suburban Chicago, but the air felt instantly cold. Sienna crossed her arms, leaning against the counter where 3 generations of family meals had been prepared. "We need to settle this once and for all," Sienna said, dropping any pretense of politeness. "My parents have sacrificed everything for me. They deserve to be treated with exactly the same priority and status as your own flesh and blood. You either accept that fully, or you are completely out of our lives." Callum cleared his throat, staring down at his polished loafers. "Mom, Sienna is just under a lot of stress with the new baby and the house transition. Just try to see it from her perspective." Lenora did not raise her voice. She did not drop the wooden spoon she was holding, nor did she let out a sigh of despair. At 64, having managed a successful botanical greenhouse for decades before retiring, she recognized a power play when she saw one. Her gaze shifted calmly between her son and her daughter-in-law. She knew the keys to the $870,000 dream home, a property she had purchased in her own name and planned to transfer to the young couple, were sitting safely inside the leather purse hanging on the pantry hook. "Family is built on mutual respect, Sienna, not ultimatums," delivered over Sunday dinner, Lenora said evenly. She turned back to the stove, stirring the gravy with slow, deliberate strokes. The silence stretched heavy and unresolved, while Callum shifted uncomfortably by the refrigerator. Sienna scoffed, shaking her head at the calm refusal to bend. Lenora offered no argument, no tears, and no lengthy speech. She simply set the timer for the oven, marking the exact moment the dynamic within her family shifted permanently. Chapter 2. Patterns of Entitlement. By Tuesday morning, the echo of Sienna's ultimatum still lingered in the quiet corners of Lenora's home. This was not an isolated emotional outburst born of fatigue, as Callum tried to suggest. For the past 6 months, every family gathering had turned into an audition, where Lenora was expected to defer to Sienna's parents, Arthur and Martha. They were polite to her face, yet carried an air of quiet condescension, treating Lenora's lifelong savings as a communal pool meant to elevate their own retirement status. Lenora sat at her kitchen table reviewing her weekly schedule while sipping black coffee. Usually Tuesdays were dedicated to preparing homemade freezer meals for Callum and Sienna to ease their busy work week. She thought about the afternoon she had spent peeling organic vegetables and slow-roasting pork loin, only for Sienna to casually remark that Martha's cooking was far better. Callum had merely laughed it off, asking his mother not to take offense so easily. A text message chimed on her phone screen. It was from Sienna, forwarding a link to a luxury home decor catalog. The caption read, "Arthur and Martha are visiting next month. Make sure the guest suite has the high thread count linens I liked, not the old ones." Lenora looked at the message without anger. She felt a cold clarity wash over her. For years, she had measured her love by her willingness to absorb inconvenience, smoothing over rough edges to keep the peace after her husband passed away. But peace built on total submission was merely a slow erosion of self. She picked up her phone, opened her calendar app, and deleted the recurring Tuesday grocery delivery reminder for Callum's household. She did not block her daughter-in-law or send an angry reply. Instead, she stood up, walked to the coat rack, and unclipped her car keys. If Sienna wanted to dictate the terms of engagement, Lenora decided she would simply stop showing up for a game she had never agreed to play. Chapter 3. The First Shift in Routine. Thursday arrived without the usual flurry of text messages or phone calls from Callum's house asking for childcare help or leftover casserole. Lenora woke up before sunrise tending to her indoor orchid collection with the methodical patience that had sustained her business for 30 years. For the first time in months, she did not rush to finish her coffee in anticipation of a mid-morning errand for the kids. At 10 o'clock, her phone buzzed with an incoming call from Callum. She let it ring twice before answering with a calm, neutral tone. "Hey, Mom," Callum said, sounding slightly rushed against the background noise of his office. "Sienna is wondering if you could swing by daycare to pick up Leo at 3. Her parents wanted to go furniture shopping downtown, and she needs someone to watch him for a few hours." Lenora clipped a dead leaf from a phalaenopsis stem before answering. "I can't do it today, Callum. I have a prior commitment." There was a brief pause on the line. A prior commitment on a Thursday. "What kind of commitment, Mom?" "It's just picking up your grandson." "I'm meeting a former colleague for lunch and my afternoon is booked." Lenora replied, her voice steady and immovable. "Sienna is going to be really upset." Callum pressed, lowering his voice as if stepping into a private conference room. "Her parents are visiting to bond with the family, and you promised to be flexible while we settle into the new phase of life." "I made no such promise about my schedule, Callum. You will need to make alternative arrangements for Leo today." She ended the call before he could formulate another rebuttal. It was a small boundary, barely a ripple in the grand scheme of their lives, yet it felt heavy with consequence. Callum and Sienna were so accustomed to her immediate availability that they treated her time as an extension of their own. When Lenora drove to the local nursery supply store an hour later to pick up new ceramic pots, she felt a quiet sense of ownership over her hours. They noticed the shift, but they still dismissed it as a minor inconvenience rather than a warning sign of deeper independence. Chapter 4. Observations Under the Surface. The afternoon sun filtered through the large bay windows of the local botanical library, casting long shadows across the wooden reading tables. Lenora sat quietly with a ledger of rare plant species, listening half-heartedly to the faint hum of conversation near the entrance. 2 aisles over familiar voices broke the quiet atmosphere. It was Arthur and Martha talking loudly on speakerphone with Sienna while browsing the adjacent display of gardening guides. "She's just being stubborn." Martha's voice echoed through the stacks, sharp and dismissive. "Once the deed to the dream house is officially in Callum's hands next week, she'll fall in line. People her age just want to feel relevant, but she needs to understand her place in our family dynamic now." Sienna's voice came through the phone speaker, equally clear. "Just make sure she doesn't try to pull any emotional games at the closing. Callum is too soft on her. If she steps out of line again, I'm cutting her off from the kids completely. That's the only language she understands." Lenora did not step out from behind the bookshelves to confront them. She remained completely still, her hand resting calmly on the open page of her book. The illusion that her quiet sacrifices were appreciated had completely evaporated, replaced by the stark reality of how her generosity was being calculated behind her back. They viewed her $870,000 investment not as a gift, born of maternal love, but as a guaranteed leverage point to subjugate her entire life. She closed the ledger with a soft click and stood up, walking out through the side exit without letting them know she had heard every word. The property transfer for the new home was scheduled for the upcoming Monday, and it required her active participation at every step. They were counting down the days until they held total legal security, completely blind to the fact that she held the final authority. Chapter 5. A quiet decision in the kitchen. Returning home, Lenora did not turn on the television or busy herself with chores. She poured a cup of herbal tea and sat at her kitchen table, watching the shadows lengthen across her manicured backyard. The emotional sting of what she had overheard in the library faded, quickly replaced by a cold, practical resolve. Grief for the family dynamic she had hoped to build gave way to clarity. The Oak Ridge Lane property had been purchased entirely with proceeds from the sale of her commercial greenhouse. Although Lenora had planned to transfer the deed to Callum and Sienna, the house remained legally hers. The $870,000 represented decades of grueling physical labor after her husband passed away. Yet Sienna spoke of the property as if it were a birthright owed to her lineage. Lenora picked up her phone and dialed a direct number. "Hello, this is Lenora Vance," she said calmly when the line connected. "I need to speak with Agent Miller regarding the upcoming transfer for the property on Oak Ridge Lane." "Good afternoon, Mrs. Vance," the agent replied promptly. "Are we ready to finalize the paperwork and hand over the keys at Monday morning's meeting? Actually, Mr. Miller, I am calling to place a permanent hold on the transfer." Lenora stated, her voice even and authoritative. "Do not execute any final document signing and cancel the scheduled key handover. I am retaining full ownership and control of the property." The agent paused, processing the abrupt instruction. "Understood, Mrs. Vance. We will freeze all proceedings pending your written confirmation." Lenora hung up the phone and closed her laptop. The emotional turbulence had completely cleared from her mind. She was not acting out of petty spite or sudden rage. She was simply protecting what belonged to her from individuals who mistook kindness for weakness. Chapter 6. Constructing a New Blueprint. Friday morning brought a crisp breeze that rustled the autumn leaves across Lenora's driveway. Instead of waiting around for an anxious call from Callum or another demanding text from Sienna, she drove downtown to meet with a trusted family attorney and financial advisor whom she had known for over 20 years. Sitting across the polished mahogany desk in Mr. Harrison's office, Lenora laid out her updated directives without hesitation. "I want to cancel the transfer of the Oak Ridge property," she explained, sliding her portfolio across the surface. "The house will remain in my name until it is sold, and the proceeds will be placed in an independently managed trust." Mr. Harrison adjusted his glasses, reviewing the legal notes with a thoughtful expression. "That is a significant pivot, Lenora, especially considering the closing date was set for next week. Are you prepared for the inevitable friction this will cause within your immediate family?" "Friction is temporary, Mr. Harrison, but permanent entanglement with people who demand total submission is a prison," Lenora replied, her tone resolute. "I spent my entire life building security through independence. I will not spend my remaining years walking on eggshells in a world dictated by my daughter-in-law's ultimatums." They spent the next hour drafting the necessary legal amendments to redirect the future proceeds toward a regional horticultural scholarship endowment and a secure annuity for her own retirement income. There was no hesitation in her pen strokes as she signed the preliminary paperwork. By noon, the arrangement was locked into motion. Lenora walked out of the office into the bright sunlight, breathing in the cool autumn air with a profound sense of lightness. She stopped by the local farmer's market to pick up fresh apples and artisanal bread, treating herself to a quiet lunch at an outdoor cafe. For the first time in years, her schedule belonged entirely to her, unburdened by the emotional debt her son's marriage sought to extract. Chapter 7. The Miscalculation at the Bistro. Saturday evening, Callum insisted that Lenora join them for a celebratory pre-closing dinner at an upscale Italian bistro downtown, claiming it was an opportunity to clear the air. Reluctantly agreeing to attend for the sake of appearances, Lenora arrived to find not only Callum and Sienna, but also Arthur and Martha seated at the center table. The atmosphere was thick with triumphant smugness. Sienna didn't even wait for Lenora to take her seat before speaking, her voice dripping with artificial warmth. "We're so glad you came, Lenora. Callum told us you were being difficult earlier in the week, but we figured you were just feeling stressed about letting go of the house. After all, by Monday afternoon, those keys will be officially ours, and we can finally put this ridiculous family drama behind us." Arthur raised his water glass with a self-satisfied smirk. "To new beginnings and generational wealth," he added, looking directly at Lenora as if expecting her to nod in humble agreement. Callum looked away nervously, playing with his napkin, clearly wishing he were anywhere else in the world. He had spent the entire week reassuring Sienna that his mother would eventually fold, convincing himself that peace could be bought by letting his wife dictate every boundary. Lenora did not pick up her glass. She folded her hands neatly on the white tablecloth, her gaze sweeping slowly across the four faces, looking at her with absolute expectation. The contrast between their inflated sense of victory and the quiet reality of what she had accomplished on Friday morning was striking. Generational wealth is earned through mutual respect and hard work. Arthur not claimed through ultimatums, Lenora said softly, her voice carrying clearly across the quiet section of the bistro. Sienna's smile faltered her eyebrows, drawing together in sudden confusion. What is that supposed to mean? Stop playing games and just admit you're ready to sign the papers on Monday. Chapter 8. The breaking point of neutrality. The ambient noise of the bistro seemed to fade as Sienna's words hung heavily in the air. Callum looked up from his napkin, finally sensing the dangerous undercurrent in his mother's calm demeanor. He opened his mouth to intervene, but the words caught in his throat under the weight of Lenora's steady gaze. "Mom, please." Callum muttered, his voice cracking with anxiety. "Let's not do this here. Can we just talk about the paperwork at home? There is nothing left to discuss at home, Callum," Lenora said, turning her attention fully toward her son. For months he had hidden behind his wife's demands, hiding his cowardice behind the excuse of keeping domestic peace. By refusing to take a stand, he had endorsed Sienna's cruelty and entitled behavior. Sienna slammed her fork down onto the ceramic plate, the sharp sound cutting through the tension. "Are you threatening to pull out now? After all the months of planning, my parents rearranged their entire schedule to help us move into that dream house on Monday. You can't just change your mind because you have a bruised ego." "It is not a bruised ego, Sienna. It is the realization that I will not finance a household built on disrespect and extortion," Lenora replied, her voice remaining perfectly even, devoid of any shouting or dramatic flair. Martha leaned forward, her face flushing with indignation. "This is outrageous. You promised that house to your son. You're punishing your own flesh and blood just because you can't handle being told how to act like a proper mother." Lenora looked directly at Martha, then back to Callum, whose face had turned completely pale. Callum had a choice every single time his wife issued an ultimatum. He chose silence, he chose compliance, and now he must live with the consequences of the environment he allowed to fester. The illusion of control that Sienna and her parents had relied upon cracked wide open. Callum stared at his mother, finally realizing that her calm exterior was not a sign of weakness waiting to yield, but the quiet strength of someone who had permanently closed the door. Chapter 9. Recovering the keys. Lenora reached slowly into her leather handbag resting on the adjacent chair. The casual, deliberate movement drew the absolute attention of everyone at the table. Sienna leaned back, her expression hardening into a mixture of disbelief and simmering panic, while Arthur and Martha watched with narrowed eyes. From inside the bag, Lenora withdrew a heavy, brass-accented keyring attached to a leather tag marked Oak Ridge Lane. She placed the keys gently in the center of the white tablecloth, right beside Sienna's water glass, sliding them across the linen with a faint metallic scrape. "The keys to the $870,000 property were still in my purse. Sienna," Lenora said quietly, every word dropping steadily into the silence of the table. "And as of yesterday morning, my attorney officially filed the paperwork to cancel the transfer. The house remains mine, and it will be sold independently." Sienna gasped, lunging forward as if to grab the keys, but stopped short as Lenora's hand covered them for a brief second before pulling back. "You can't do that!" Sienna shrieked, her voice rising in pitch as heads at neighboring tables turned to look. "You promised. You manipulated us. That house belongs to Callum and me. It belongs to my financial estate, bought with my own labor, and it remains under my complete control," Lenora replied. Lenora picked up the keys, slipped them back into her purse, and rose calmly from her chair. She draped her wool coat over her arm and looked down at her son, who sat paralyzed, unable to meet her eyes. "Callum, you chose your path. I hope it brings you the peace you were looking for," Lenora said softly. She turned away from the table, leaving behind the wreckage of their entitled expectations, and stepping out into the cool evening air of Chicago as a completely free woman. Chapter 10, A New Horizon by the Lake. 2 months passed, bringing the sharp chill of late November to the northern suburbs. Lenora stood on the enclosed balcony of her new apartment, a bright contemporary 2-bedroom space overlooking the quiet expanse of Lake Michigan. The walls were adorned with framed botanical prints, and the air smelled faintly of fresh coffee and cedar wood. Moving out of her large suburban house had been liberating. She had downsized into a space that belonged solely to her, requiring no maintenance for ungrateful relatives or sprawling guest suites. Her phone chimed on the kitchen counter. It was a brief message from Callum, sent without Sienna's supervision. He explained that they had failed to secure a mortgage on their own. Their rent had doubled, and their marriage was undergoing intense counseling as the financial strain fractured their fragile foundation. He asked if they could talk, his tone humble and defeated. Lenora read the message while watching the distant lights of sailboats glide across the gray water. She did not feel malice, nor did she feel the urge to rush to his rescue. She replied with a short, compassionate wish for his future, but firmly declined any involvement in their financial crisis. Her boundaries were no longer up for negotiation. She set the phone down and walked over to her writing desk, where the finalized documents for the Regional Horticultural Scholarship Foundation sat neatly in a leather folder. The $870,000 from the greenhouse property that once threatened to bind her to a lifetime of emotional blackmail was now actively funding the education of young botanists who valued hard work and perseverance. Lenora smiled, pouring a fresh cup of tea and settling into her favorite armchair as the afternoon sun broke through the clouds over the lake. Her life was quiet, orderly, and entirely her own. She had kept the keys not just to a house, but to her own dignity and peace of mind, proving that it is never too late to reclaim the steering wheel of one's own destiny.